Northport had always been a town of order, the kind of place where families stayed for generations, where crime was low, and where everyone knew each other. But in the fall of 2011, something changed. Fear took hold. It all started with a secret, a technique, a method so subtle that no one suspected its power, until it was too late. Dr. George Kenney had been the principal of Northport High for over a decade. A charismatic man with a deep, soothing voice, he was beloved by students and faculty alike. But he had another talent, one that many found fascinating, some found questionable, and a few would come to fear. At first, it was a harmless trick, a way to help students focus before big exams or perform better in sports. He had even hypnotized entire classrooms as a relaxation technique. The students who volunteered always described the experience the same way: peaceful, weightless, like floating in a dream. Ethan Williams was a promising athlete, a senior with dreams of playing college football. When he approached Dr. Kenney for help managing stress, no one thought twice about it. The session was brief, just an hour in the principal's office, away from prying eyes. When he emerged, he was dazed, but smiling. "I feel lighter," he had told his teammates, "like a weight has been lifted." That night, Ethan never woke up. His parents found him the next morning, lying perfectly still in bed, his eyes half open, mouth slightly ajar. There were no signs of struggle, no indications of foul play. The coroner listed the cause of death as undetermined, but rumors swirled. His friends whispered about the hypnosis session, about how different Ethan had seemed afterward, about how he had complained of strange dreams before he went to bed that night. A week later, Olivia Carter died. A straight-A student, Olivia had been under enormous pressure to excel. She had sought out Dr. Kenney's help for anxiety, just as Ethan had. The principal had assured her that hypnosis would help her feel calmer, more in control. But when Olivia's mother walked into their living room that evening, she found her daughter slumped over her piano, her fingers frozen over the keys. Her eyes were wide open, her pupils dilated, her mouth forming a silent scream. The doctors said it was a sudden cardiac event, but Olivia had no history of heart problems. And, just like Ethan, she had been hypnotized only hours before. The town's fear was now palpable. 2 bright, healthy students, dead without explanation. Then came Mason. Mason Torres was a quiet kid, an artist, someone who didn't attract much attention. But he had a secret. He had been a doctor. Kenney's office the day Olivia had her session. He had watched as the principal's fingers moved in slow, rhythmic circles, as his voice dropped into a near whisper, as Olivia's body went slack. Mason had felt something then, something cold, something creeping at the edge of his consciousness. He had left before Olivia woke up, but the sensation had lingered, like an echo in his mind. A week later, Mason was found in his car, parked outside his house. The engine was off, his hands gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. His face was twisted in an expression of terror, frozen in a silent scream, just like Olivia's. 3 students, 3 deaths, all connected to Dr. Kenney. And that was only the beginning. Northport was no longer the peaceful town it once was. 3 students were dead, and the only connection between them was Dr. George Kenney, the principal who hypnotized them. Rumors swirled through the halls of Northport High. Some students believed it was just a coincidence, that Ethan, Olivia, and Mason's deaths were tragic but unrelated. Others weren't so sure. Whispers of something more sinister spread like wildfire. Some said that Kenney had unlocked something in their minds, something they weren't meant to access. Parents grew uneasy. Teachers cast wary glances at the principal, but Kenney remained composed, his voice calm and authoritative, dismissing the hysteria. Hypnosis is harmless, he reassured the school board. It is simply a tool for relaxation, for focus. But not everyone believed him. One of those skeptics was Brittany Palumbo. Brittany had known Olivia since childhood. They had sleepovers, studied for exams together, shared dreams of going to college. When Olivia died, Brittany was devastated. But when Mason followed, she became terrified. Something wasn't right, and she was determined to find out what. She started digging. Late at night, she combed through old news articles and psychology journals. She found stories of people experiencing strange side effects from hypnosis, memory gaps, hallucinations, sudden personality shifts. One article caught her attention. The power of post-hypnotic suggestions. Can they be deadly? Her hands trembled as she read about cases where individuals followed subconscious commands without realizing it. What if Ethan, Olivia, and Mason had been given a suggestion? What if something had triggered it? Brittany wasn't the only one growing suspicious. A teacher, Mr. Callahan, had overheard something disturbing. Days before Ethan's death, he had walked past Kenney's office and heard the principal's voice, low and measured, like a steady drumbeat. Then silence. When Ethan emerged, his pupils were dilated, his expression distant. At the time, Callahan dismissed it as nothing. Now, he wasn't so sure. The breaking point came when Brittany made a bold decision. She would get hypnotized herself. She scheduled a session with Kenney under the pretense of needing help with test anxiety. As she sat in his office, she focused on the rhythm of his voice, the slow movements of his hands. She felt herself slipping, her thoughts growing distant. But before she fully succumbed, something in her mind screamed at her to fight. She forced herself to stay aware, to remember everything. Then Kenney spoke in a tone different from before. When you wake, you will remember nothing. But when you hear the bell ring 3 times, you will know the truth. Her body stiffened. This wasn't just relaxation, this was programming. Brittany left the office shaken but determined. She had to warn someone. But as she stepped outside, a deep sense of unease settled in her chest. The air felt heavier. The school halls seemed darker. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her. That night, she wrote everything down. Every detail. If anything happened to her, someone had to know the truth. The next morning, the school bell rang 3 times for an emergency drill. Brittany collapsed. Her breathing became erratic. Her pupils widened. She gasped, as though drowning in invisible water. Students screamed as she clawed at her throat, as if fighting against something inside her mind. Then she stopped moving. The paramedics arrived, but it was too late. Another student was gone, and the only person who knew why was Dr. George Kenney. Brittany Palumbo was dead. The news spread through Northport like wildfire, igniting an already simmering panic. Another promising young life had been lost, and the whispers turned to outright accusations. Fear gripped the students, teachers, and parents alike. Something was very, very wrong at Northport High. Dr. George Kenney, once the respected principal, was now viewed with suspicion. His hypnosis sessions, once considered harmless, had now led to 4 inexplicable deaths. But despite the rising tensions, he continued to maintain his innocence. "I have only ever tried to help my students," he told the press, his voice steady, his expression unreadable. But behind closed doors, Kenney was unraveling. Late at night, he sat in his dimly lit office, reviewing his hypnosis notes with trembling hands. The techniques he had used weren't supposed to cause harm. They were meant to ease stress, improve focus, enhance performance. Yet, something had gone terribly wrong. He whispered to himself, trying to recall every session. What had he said? What had he done? And then he remembered. the suggestions, the subtle commands he had planted in their subconscious minds, the way he had experimented, just a little, pushing the boundaries of what was possible. He had never meant to take it this far, but now, the deaths weighed on him like a suffocating force. Outside the school, a group of students gathered, their fear turning into something else. Anger. Among them was Daniel Harper, Olivia's boyfriend. He had been quiet up until now, drowning in grief. But after Brittany's death, he had had enough. "He's doing something to them," Daniel told his friends, "and I'm going to prove it." That night, Daniel broke into the school. The halls were eerily silent, the air thick with unease. He moved quickly, his flashlight casting long, jittery shadows against the lockers. He made his way to Kenney's office and started rifling through the drawers. Then he found it. A leather-bound journal filled with handwritten notes, pages upon pages detailing each hypnosis session, observations, patterns, experiments, and at the very end, something chilling. 4 down. More to go. Daniel's blood turned to ice. He wasn't just helping students, he was controlling them, testing limits, pushing boundaries, and he wasn't finished. A sound made him freeze. The door creaked open, and in the dim light, he saw the silhouette of Dr. Kenney. "You shouldn't be here, Daniel," Kenney said, his voice eerily calm. Daniel clutched the journal to his chest. "What are you doing to us?" Kenney sighed and stepped forward. "You don't understand. The mind is so fragile, so easily influenced. I never meant for this to happen, but now that it has, there's no turning back." Daniel tried to run, but Kenney's voice dropped into a slow, rhythmic tone. "Look into my eyes, Daniel." Daniel's vision blurred. His limbs grew heavy. He felt himself slipping, sinking into the depths of his own mind. And then, everything went black. Darkness swallowed Daniel Harper whole. The last thing he remembered was Dr. Kenney's voice, low, steady, powerful. Now, he was adrift in a void, his mind twisting in on itself. His limbs felt paralyzed, his thoughts tangled like vines. He tried to fight it, to push against the force that held him, but the deeper he struggled, the heavier his body became. Somewhere in the distance, he heard whispers, faint, distorted, looping over and over again. "You will forget. You will obey. You are safe here." No, he wasn't safe. None of them were. A cold dread slithered through him as flashes of memory surfaced. Olivia's lifeless eyes, Mason's final breath, Brittany's collapsed body. He had to get out. He had to wake up. But the voice was still there, wrapping around his consciousness like chains. Deeper, deeper. Suddenly, a sharp noise pierced through the fog. A pounding sound. Daniel felt a tug inside his mind, like someone shaking him from a deep sleep. The whispers faltered, distorted, and then light. Blinding, searing light. He gasped awake, his body jerking violently as he collapsed onto the cold tile floor. His chest heaved as he sucked in air, his vision swimming. He was in Kenney's office, the dim glow of a desk lamp casting eerie shadows along the walls. The journal, the proof, lay open beside him. And standing over him, eyes wild with panic, was Mr. Callahan. "Daniel! Wake up, kid! We have to go!" Daniel blinked, his mind struggling to catch up. What? Callahan grabbed him by the shoulders. "Kenney's coming back. We have to leave, now!" The urgency in his voice snapped Daniel into action. He scrambled to his feet, snatching the journal as Callahan dragged him toward the door. Footsteps echoed down the hallway. Heavy, deliberate. They only had seconds. Callahan pulled Daniel into a janitor's closet just as the office door creaked open. Through the slats, Daniel could see Dr. Kenney step inside, his expression unreadable. But then Kenney did something strange. He didn't look around. He didn't check the drawers. He simply stood there. His gaze lifted, scanning the ceiling as if sensing something unseen. And then he whispered, "I know you're here." Daniel's breath caught in his throat. Callahan squeezed his arm, signaling him to stay still. The tension in the air was suffocating. Kenney took a step forward, his voice soft yet commanding. "You think you've won something? You don't understand. The mind, it's just another muscle. And once it's been trained," his eyes darkened, "it never forgets." A sharp ringing filled Daniel's ears. His vision blurred. His body swayed. "Number not again. Not this time." He gritted his teeth, forcing his mind to fight. He wasn't going to be another name on Kenney's list. A loud crash sounded outside the office. Someone had set off the fire alarm. The shrieking sirens shattered the trance, and Callahan yanked Daniel out of the closet. They bolted down the hallway as Kenney's enraged shouts echoed behind them. They didn't stop running until they reached the parking lot. Callahan shoved Daniel into his car, tires screeching as they peeled out onto the road. Daniel clutched the journal, his heart pounding. He's controlling them," he panted. "He's controlling all of us." Callahan's grip tightened on the wheel. Not for much longer. They had the evidence. Now, they just had to survive long enough to expose the truth. The fire alarm blared through the night, sending a wave of chaos rippling across Northport High. The faculty scrambled to assess the situation, unaware that two figures were already vanishing into the darkness. Daniel Harper and Mr. Callahan sped through the empty streets, the principal's journal clutched tightly in Daniel's shaking hands. His mind raced with everything he had just endured: the hypnosis, the suffocating darkness, Kenney's voice inside his head. Callahan drove like a man possessed, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "We can't go home," he muttered. "Not yet. He'll be looking for us." Daniel swallowed hard. "Where do we go?" The teacher hesitated, then nodded. "I know someone. Someone who's been looking into Kenney longer than anyone else." They drove in tense silence, winding through the dimly lit roads until they reached a small, isolated house on the outskirts of town. Callahan killed the engine and motioned for Daniel to follow. The two hurried up the porch steps, and Callahan knocked in a distinct pattern. 3 quick taps, then 2 slower ones. A few moments later, the door creaked open. A woman peered out, her piercing green eyes flicking between them before settling on Callahan. "Callahan, what the hell?" "No time, Emily," he interrupted. "It's happening again." Emily Carter, the former investigative journalist who had tried to expose Kenney years ago, exhaled sharply, stepping aside to let them in. The living room was cluttered with stacks of old newspapers, folders, and photographs. Daniel's eyes widened as he spotted a wall covered in pinned-up articles, each one connected with red string leading to a single name: Dr. George Kenney. "You knew," Daniel whispered. "You knew what he was doing." Emily nodded grimly. "I tried to warn people, but no one listened." She turned to Callahan. "Tell me everything." As Callahan spoke, Daniel flipped through Kenney's journal, the words blurring together in his exhausted state. Pages upon pages of notes detailed how he had experimented on students, testing the limits of suggestion. But one passage made Daniel's blood run cold. "It's no longer just a suggestion. The right frequency, the right tone. I can plant ideas, urges, commands, and they will obey." His hands shook. "He's not just hypnotizing us, he's controlling us." A sudden noise outside made all 3 of them freeze. Footsteps, slow, deliberate. Then, A voice. Low. Steady. Familiar. Daniel. I know you're in there. Kenney. Emily grabbed a handgun from the coffee table and motioned for them to be silent. The three crouched low, hearts hammering. The front doorknob rattled. I only want to talk, Kenney said. You've misunderstood my work. I'm not the villain here. Daniel clutched the journal tighter, sweat beading on his forehead. Kenney's voice dropped lower, his tone dripping with something unnatural. Come outside, Daniel. Let's have a conversation. There's no need to be afraid. A wave of dizziness crashed over Daniel. His limbs tingled. His thoughts grew sluggish. The words looped in his mind, pressing against his will like a tidal wave. Come outside. His foot shifted forward. Emily grabbed his wrist, whispering urgently, Don't listen. Fight it. Daniel clenched his jaw, shaking his head violently. The spell wavered, but Kenney's presence loomed just beyond the door. And then, silence. After a few agonizing minutes, Emily peeked through the blinds. Kenney was gone. Daniel let out a shaky breath, his body trembling. He almost had me. Callahan placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. But he didn't. Emily exhaled. We need to go public with this. If we don't, more kids will die. Daniel tightened his grip on the journal. They had the truth. Now, they just had to survive long enough to expose it. The morning air was thick with tension. Daniel Harper, Mr. Callahan, and Emily Carter sat huddled in the dimly lit living room, exhaustion weighing heavy on them. The events of the previous night still rattled in their minds. Kenney had found them. And worse, he had almost taken control of Daniel again. Emily adjusted her glasses, scanning the notes from Kenney's journal. We can't keep running. If we don't expose him now, he'll make sure we disappear. Callahan rubbed his temples. The problem is, no one will believe us without solid proof. This journal might convince some, but we need more. We need someone who can testify against him. Daniel exhaled sharply. What about the other students? The ones he hypnotized before? Emily's expression darkened. Most of them are dead. The ones who survived, they either refuse to talk or don't remember anything. But she hesitated, flipping through an old stack of files before pulling out a faded photograph. There is one person who might help us. Daniel leaned in. The picture showed a girl, her eyes hollow, her expression haunted. Her name is Claire Thompson. She was one of Kenney's earliest experiments, Emily continued. She went missing for a year after her sessions with him. When she returned, she refused to speak about what happened. But I've kept track of her. She's living in a small apartment on the other side of town. If anyone knows how deep Kenney's control goes, it's her. Callahan nodded. Then we need to find her, before Kenney does. The drive to Claire's apartment was quiet, but the unease between them spoke volumes. When they arrived, the building was a decaying structure with flickering lights and a broken security camera dangling uselessly from the wall. Emily knocked on the door, her pulse quickening. After a long pause, the door cracked open. A pale woman peered out, her eyes darting between them with suspicion. Claire, Emily asked gently. We need to talk. It's about Kenney. The woman stiffened, her fingers tightening on the doorframe. Go away. Daniel stepped forward. Please. We know what he did to you. We need your help to stop him. Claire's breath hitched. She hesitated, then finally stepped aside. Inside. Quickly. The apartment was dark, the windows covered in thick blankets. Newspaper clippings littered the floor, all of them featuring stories about Kenney's hypnosis experiments. Daniel noticed that some had names scribbled in red ink, names of students, names of victims. You've been keeping track of him, Emily said, scanning the mess. Claire shivered. You don't understand. He's not just hypnotizing people. He's changing them. Making them do things. Things they'd never do. Her voice caught. He made me hurt someone. Someone I loved, and I couldn't stop myself. Daniel's stomach churned. Claire, we need to stop him. But we can't do it alone. We need your story. She shook her head violently. You don't get it. You think you can expose him? You think you can run? He sees everything. He hears everything. Her breathing quickened. He's probably listening to us right now. A loud thud echoed from the hallway outside. All four of them froze. Another thud. Then a slow, deliberate knock on the door. Daniel's blood ran cold. A familiar voice spoke through the wood. Calm, confident, dripping with control. Claire, open the door. Kenney. Claire's eyes went wide with terror. She clamped a hand over her mouth to keep from screaming. Emily grabbed her gun, and Callahan reached for the nearest object he could use as a weapon. The doorknob twisted, rattling in place. I know you're in there, Kenney cooed. I just want to talk. Daniel clutched Claire's hand. Don't listen, he whispered. Whatever happens, don't listen to his voice. Kenney's tone dropped lower. Claire, you remember, don't you? How good it felt to let go. No more pain. No more fear. Just peace. Claire's breathing grew erratic. She was trembling, her eyes glazing over. Emily cursed under her breath. He's getting to her. We have to move. Now! Daniel grabbed the nearest chair and wedged it under the doorknob. We can't stay here. Is there another way out? Claire blinked rapidly, fighting for clarity. Then she pointed toward the bathroom. Window! Fire escape! The knocking grew louder, more forceful. Don't make this difficult, Kenney warned. Let me in. They moved fast. Callahan and Daniel helped Claire through the window, followed by Emily. Daniel was halfway through when, bang! The door burst open. Kenney stood in the doorway, his expression eerily composed. His piercing gaze met Daniel's. Look into my eyes, he whispered. A wave of dizziness struck Daniel like a hammer. His muscles locked. His breath caught in his throat. His vision blurred. Kenney's voice was everywhere, inside him, drowning his thoughts. Obey. A hand yanked Daniel through the window. He hit the fire escape hard, breaking the spell just as Emily slammed the window shut. Run! She screamed. They didn't hesitate. They raced down the fire escape, their hearts pounding. Behind them, the window shattered. Kenney's shadow loomed above. Daniel didn't look back. He couldn't. He just ran. The city streets blurred past them as Daniel, Emily, Callahan, and Claire sprinted away from the apartment complex. Kenney's voice still echoed in Daniel's mind, a sinister whisper clawing at the edges of his consciousness. Where do we go? Claire gasped, barely able to keep pace. Somewhere public, Emily panted. Somewhere he can't control us without witnesses. Callahan cursed under his breath. That won't stop him forever. He's got power beyond just words. He's embedded his control deep in the minds of anyone he's touched. We need to end this. Tonight. Daniel slowed, his mind racing. We need to turn his own power against him. Emily shot him a wary glance. How? We broadcast him. Live. They found refuge in an old news station, long abandoned but still functional. Claire, once a journalist before her encounter with Kenney, worked quickly to set up the cameras and connect them to an anonymous live feed. We get him to talk, Daniel explained, pacing. We make him show the world what he's capable of. If people witness him hypnotizing someone in real time, they'll have to believe us. Callahan frowned. And who's going to be the bait? Daniel didn't hesitate. Me. Emily's eyes widened. Daniel, no. You've been under his control before. You barely escaped last time. That's exactly why it has to be me. He thinks he can break me again. But if I can resist, even for a few moments, we'll have everything we need. Claire's hands shook as she finished adjusting the cameras. Once the live stream starts, we can't stop. No matter what happens, the world needs to see. Daniel swallowed hard. Then let's do this. Kenney arrived as if he had been waiting for the invitation. He stepped into the dimly lit studio with an eerie calm, his gaze sweeping over them like a predator assessing its prey. His tailored suit was pristine, his movements deliberate. Daniel, he greeted, voice smooth as silk. You're ready to come back, aren't you? Daniel clenched his fists, planting himself in front of the camera. Not this time. This time, you answer our questions. Kenney smirked. Is that what you think? That you have control here? His eyes flicked toward Claire, then Callahan, then Emily. I can feel it. The fear, the doubt. You all want to resist, but deep down, you know it's easier to give in. Emily pressed the button. The live feed went live. Why don't you tell the world what you've done? Daniel challenged. Tell them how many lives you've destroyed. Kenney chuckled, shaking his head. You still don't understand, do you? I haven't destroyed lives. I've freed them. I've taken weak, broken people and made them into something greater. His eyes locked onto Daniel's. Would you like me to remind you? A shiver crawled up Daniel's spine, but he steeled himself. You won't win this time. Kenney took a step forward. Look into my eyes. Daniel felt the pull immediately. The world around him dimmed. His limbs grew heavy. The whispers curled into his mind like smoke, coaxing, soothing. Give in. His heartbeat slowed. His vision blurred. Daniel! Emily's voice barely reached him. He could feel the panic in her tone, but it was distant, like an echo down a long, dark tunnel. Kenney's voice was all-consuming now. Just relax. Let me in. Let me guide you. And then, a scream shattered the trance. Claire. She had taken the camera, turning it to face Kenney directly. The live chat was exploding. Viewers were witnessing the impossible. He's doing it right now, one message read. OMG, he hypnotized him live, another user posted. Is this real? Someone call the police. Kenney faltered. His expression twitched, momentarily disrupted. He blinked, realizing that everyone was watching. The spell snapped. Daniel gasped, stumbling backward. His mind cleared, the whispers gone. And for the first time, Kenney looked afraid. Sirens wailed in the distance. The police had been notified. The truth was out. Kenney turned to run, but Callahan was faster. With a forceful shove, he knocked Kenney off balance. Not this time, you bastard! The doors burst open, officers storming inside. Kenney barely had time to process what was happening before they tackled him to the ground, handcuffs clicking around his wrists. You don't understand, he roared, struggling. I control them. I control everything. Emily stepped forward, meeting his crazed gaze. Not anymore. In the days that followed, the video went viral. News stations, social media platforms, and investigative journalists all dissected the footage. Experts debated how Kenney's hypnosis worked, while survivors came forward with their own horrifying stories. Kenney was charged with multiple counts of manslaughter, illegal experimentation, and criminal coercion. His influence was shattered. Daniel, Emily, Callahan, and Claire watched as the world finally saw the truth. It's over, Claire whispered one night as they sat together, the weight of everything settling in. Daniel exhaled. Yeah, it is. But deep down, as he stared at the dark corners of the room, he couldn't shake the feeling. Somewhere, somehow, Kenney's voice still lingered. Thank you for watching till the end. What was the most chilling moment in this story for you? Do you believe hypnosis could be used in such a terrifying way in real life? Why or why not? If you were in Daniel's position, do you think you could resist Kenney's control? Did you enjoy this story? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more spine-chilling true crime stories. Thank you for watching. Your support keeps us going.